Hey, it's Matt. When you think back to the games of your childhood, what comes to mind? My first game console ever was a silver Game Boy Advance, but instead of Mario or Zelda, some of the only games I owned were backyard sports games. Pac-Man was the extent of my parents' video game knowledge, so my experience was limited to sports and licensed kid games. I have fond memories of my time spent playing football, hockey, and skateboarding in the car on the way to school or at my siblings' sports practices and games. Since then, my tastes in video games have evolved, and before today I can't remember the last time I even bought a sports game. It also doesn't help that companies like EA and 2K have moved away from sports sims and into gambling sims. But recently, I've been feeling nostalgic, so I decided to take a look back at the games I was playing almost 20 years ago. If you just want to see one specific sport, the timestamps will be in the description. And if you enjoy the video, I'd appreciate it if you could leave a like or subscribe. It lets me know what sort of content people want to see more of. And with that, let's start with baseball. When it comes to backyard sports in the GBA, we have a few options. We've got the original from 2002, 2006, and 2007. I've since lost most of my childhood GBA games, so I'm not entirely sure which of the games I played, but I do remember receiving Backyard Baseball 2007 for the PS2 for my birthday one year. So at the very least, I played a version of this game. This game was developed by GameBrains, and I can't find any information regarding this developer, other than that they developed most of the Backyard Baseball games. Regardless, I decided to play a few games in the season mode, which is where I would have spent most of my time as a kid. The game's roster is pretty decent, and there are even additional characters you can unlock for reaching certain milestones in the game. You don't start out with a decent pitcher unlocked, so I decided to mess around with the player customizer for a bit. I remember creating characters for specialized positions as a kid. If there wasn't a player that had a maxed out pitching bar, I'd just create my own. So here, I created Mr. Pitch. I didn't have room for Mr. Pitcher. This customizer is one of the better ones in the Backyard Sports franchise. We have plenty of options to choose from regarding looks, and can even choose his nickname, set his birthday, and give him a walk-up song for when he comes up to bat. But Mr. Pitch isn't going to be doing too much at the plate with zero power and zero contact. Hopefully he'll be able to make up for it in the mound, with a full pitching bar and the rest of his points in defense. This game does a good job of selecting positions based on your character's stats, so I just went with what it gave me. I have the difficulty set to All-Star, and with most of the other settings turned on. So with that, let's get ready for opening day. One of the first things that I noticed was that the game seems to slow down at really weird times. I assume it's trying to load the next scene, as usually it happens after the play is over. But it is a bit annoying when there's no one on base and you have to wait a few seconds for the game to figure things out. The gameplay itself isn't anything too special, with not much flair, but it's a simple GBA sports game. When batting, you can choose whether to swing for the fences, hit a line drive, a ground ball, or bunt. Different batters have different stances, and it seems like some can swing the bat faster than others, which would give you an advantage over other characters. I'm unsure if it's related to their stance or stats, but it's something I noticed. When pitching, you can choose from 4 pitches, then choose where you want to throw the pitch. When fielding, a red and white target appears where the ball will land, so you can judge where to stand when trying to catch a ball. You also have control over where you throw the ball, so there's nothing automatic about this game the way some other baseball games are. In my first game against the Braves, I got absolutely rocked in the first inning, striking out in 9 pitches, then allowing 13 runs in the first. Mr. Pitch wasn't living up to his name, so I swapped him out and was finally able to retire the side. I finally started to get the hang of things, and in the second, I managed to put a few runs up on the board, but a 13-run deficit after the first inning is a tough hole to climb out of, and allowing 7 more runs in the second doesn't help. After a 3-20 loss, I decided to change the difficulty down to Pro, in the hopes of my fictional Detroit sports team not having to suffer through a losing season the same way real Detroit sports teams do. Against the Angels, I managed to hit a home run and get us up early, but in typical Detroit fashion, we blew the lead. The game did end up being closer though, only a 7-1 loss this time. Finally, on the easiest difficulty, I was able to pull off a 1-0 win at home. For my sort of mini review of the game, I think it's decent enough to keep a kid busy in the car, but not much more than that. You're going to hear me say this a lot in the video, but I think that's the best way I can sum these games up. I do appreciate the small details though, as you can see your player's stats over the season, something a stats nerd like myself appreciates. I did notice that it didn't properly track my custom player stats, though I'm entirely unsure if it's just a display bug or if the game wasn't able to calculate Mr. Pitch's 100+ ERA properly. You also have access to a schedule where you can keep track of your wins and losses, as well as see whether the game was at home or away. Another small thing I noticed was that each team had home and away jerseys. Maybe my expectations for the game were too low, but it's not something I expected and adds a bit of feel to the game. For gameplay, I struggled when it came to defense, and it seemed like regardless of where I pitched the ball, the CPU just hit it to where my fielders weren't. I'm unsure whether I was doing something wrong or if it was just a skill issue. Offense felt better, though I should have looked up the controls before playing. I'm winning completely blind, so I'm unsure whether or not there's a sprint button for base runners. I would hit a ball off the wall and be halfway to second once the fielder fielded the ball, only to be thrown out at second. Mr. Pitch even got thrown out going from first to second on a ball off the wall. I'm sure his speed being at 0 didn't help, but still, overall, a decent game with some charm, but not too much depth. On to football. Out of all the backyard sports games, I probably spent the most time with football. I had both the original game from 2002 as well as 2006. I'll also give a bit of a spoiler for the rest of the video and say that this is the best backyard sports GBA game in terms of overall gameplay and feel. Backyard sports games were developed by Taurus Games, which is your typical licensed video game developer. Strangely enough, the only other game developed by them that I played was NASCAR for the Leapster, if any of you remember that. It was a massive green and silver tablet that only had educational games. Regardless, I can't quite put my finger on the reason, but this game just seems to have a better and less cheap feel than the other games. It feels much more polished overall, and the menus, while not much functionally different compared to the previous games, it just looks much more visually distinct and appealing. Again, I started up season mode, and as no characters had maxed out kicking stats, I created another character. This time there weren't as many settings, but we're still able to create Rocket, who I assume is a long lost relative of Mr. Pitch. We can't max out a stat in this game, so we gave Rocket as much kicking ability as we can, and then add the rest to blocking and catching. After picking the rest of the team, it's time to start the season. In this game, you get a short cutscene of 2 announcers before each game, at halftime and after the game. They don't say much of note, but it's still a nice touch that enhances the game's presentation. The gameplay itself isn't too complicated, though it feels really fluid and nice to control. It is easy to cheese the CPU, so I was able to run up the score on them even on the hardest difficulty. An example of this is when you're kicking. They don't move after you snap the ball and wait until you've kicked it. You can't do much with this, but it does take all the pressure off you when you're kicking a field goal and instead can just waste the clock. You'll also notice that when on defense, the CPU will stick to its play and guard receivers until the QB crosses the line of scrimmage, then they just all converge on him at once. If you've got a strong enough center to block, you can just wait until your receivers are all the way down the field along with their defender and then just run the ball. Lastly, when on defense, the CPU is super easy to sack by running around the center while holding the sprint button. This is probably the most game-breaking way you can cheese the game, if you want to call it that, as you can force a punt and even a safety in almost every possession. Taking advantage of this, you can bring the Lions the closest to a Super Bowl or Cereal Bowl that they'll ever be. Aside from the gameplay, as I mentioned earlier, this game has the best visual presentation out of all the backyard sports GBA games. The scoreboard looks great. It even lets you know the down before the snap, and you can play in the rain, and the fields, while there aren't many to choose from, are all visually distinct with different surfaces. Being able to play football on a beach in the sand while it's raining really helps this game stand out from the rest and adds some much needed visual variety. The play selection menu between snaps is also phenomenal. It's laid out perfectly, giving you access to all the information you need, while not appearing too cluttered. That's enough about football, it's on to hockey. Hockey only has one game for the GBA, having been released in 2003. It was developed by Mystic Software, which also developed the GBA basketball games, as well as most of the backyard sports DS games. They released a few WiiWare and licensed DS games after this and don't seem to be active since, so it's safe to say they closed down or were bought out sometime in the late 2000s or early 2010s. This is another game I spent plenty of time on, as I actually play hockey. I started when I was 4 and play for a club team at my school. Most of my memories come from the DS version of this game, which I received for Christmas one year, and for a while I was unable to find any information about the GBA version on the internet. I think I tried looking well in middle school and for some reason, only found info on the DS game, which led me to believe that there was never a GBA backyard hockey game. But that wasn't true, so here we are with backyard hockey for the GBA. Is it just me, or is this game's menu music really weird? It almost has a mystical feel to it. It doesn't seem fitting for a hockey game to me. I guess it does sound like a Snow or Ice World theme, though I think it would have been much better fitting in a fantasy game. It's too weird for hockey, so I do have a bit of a confession here. Based on my previous team selections, I'm sure you can figure out where I'm from, but as a kid, I was actually a Pittsburgh Penguins fan. In first grade, one of my hockey coaches was demonstrating crossovers for us and told us that we should watch Sidney Crosby to see how he does them. From then on, I was a Penguins fan. I've since come home and will support the Red Wings, but the Penguins will always have a soft spot in my heart. At least I didn't become a Leafs fan, which would have been terrible. Again, we're going to create a character. This one is similar to what was possible with football. We're still able to make Rocket, who's going to be our goalie, even though we have Brodeur on our team. He's also able to pass and skate decently, and well enough to have the game put him in as our second line center. Something interesting to note here is that you can have players play goalie and skate in the same game. It surprised me when all of a sudden Rocket lined up for the draw during a power play after having started the game in net. In terms of gameplay, I think this game falls right between baseball and football. It's alright, but not quite as good as football, though it is better than baseball. The game can get pretty hectic, though I feel like you can't control your characters exactly how you want to. There's no stick handling, and the most effective shooting method seems to be taking a slap shot and just hoping the goalie misses it. Wrist shots aren't that effective, and the only goal I scored that wasn't just a slap shot was on a rebound from a slap shot. It was my most satisfying goal, though not the most common one. There are penalties, and depending on how you play, you may take a lot of them. I play pretty aggressively, and if you don't steal the puck from your opponent, you're going to draw a penalty. This was also something I noticed with basketball, and now that I know it's the same developer, it makes sense why these two games felt similar. Aside from that, there's not much else to say about this game. There are a few quirks, such as two-line passes being illegal, just like they were in the NHL at the time, although that rule was removed in 2005, almost 20 years ago. Well, I think the in-game scoreboard is pretty ugly, which results in there being too much blue on screen when you take into account that the ice is also blue. The scoreboard during stoppages of play does look pretty nice. It's pretty bare bones, but there's nothing wrong with that. You get all the information you need at the time. You also get a more in-depth stats report between periods, plus the animations of kids zamboning the ice. This animation is what I remembered most about the game as a kid. Something about being able to do by yourself what a massive machine did seemed really appealing to me. It would have been inefficient using a water pitcher to resurface a hockey rink, but little Matt wasn't interested in the details. Speaking of details, the goals being boxed in some areas are also a nice touch. Though aside from that, most of the rinks look the same, which is unfortunate. Before talking about backyard basketball, I'll just be honest and admit that basketball is probably my least favorite sport and the one I know the least about. I played it on the playground during recess and I can follow a game and know what's going on, but anything in terms of strategy and even what certain positions do is beyond me, but I'll give this game a fair shot. As is tradition at this point, we create Pickles and turn him into a brick wall by allocating all of our points to defense. He's not going to be able to do anything but block shots, though this is the Pistons we're talking about here. I think the requirement to join the team is being able to dribble up and down the court without losing the ball. The gameplay is fast-paced, which I like, but I couldn't get the hang of it. I started off alright on hard difficulty, keeping pace with the Pacers through the first half of the game, but it all fell apart during the second half. I discovered the sprint and steal buttons, which led to me doing nothing but take offensive and defensive fouls. After that, it went all downhill for me. I ended up getting destroyed. I was unable to stop them on defense and could barely make a basket on offense. I'm not sure if this was due to me or my characters, but I couldn't make anything that wasn't a layup. I thought I was doing alright when it came to button timing for my shots, but I guess not. I ended up going 1 for 26 with 3-pointers. From what I remember as a kid, you could cheese the game and make some crazy shots once you got the timing down. Maybe I was just better as a kid, or maybe I'm thinking of the wrong game. In our next game, I decided to let Pickles get some game time, and that was probably the biggest mistake I've made so far. I was already struggling to make shots, and Pickles didn't make that any easier. Poor guy didn't even make a basket, went 0 for 7 and couldn't even get an assist. He got a few defensive rebounds, which I guess is what he was created to do, but all around, a poor showing for Pickles and the Pistons, probably the most realistic part of the game. For our last game, we have backyard skateboarding, one that I probably have the most memories with as a kid. I remember begging my mom to get this at the time, and she eventually bought it for me off Amazon. I had seen trailers and gameplay for the PC version of backyard skateboarding, and it just seemed like a cool game to little Matt. Being able to explore these massive environments, go and do whatever you want. To a kid whose entire experience with video games up to that point were sports games and whatever licensed game my mom thought I might like, this was a whole new world. While I never did end up getting the PC version, I did get the GBA version, and I remember spending hours and hours playing this game. I have a memory of waking up super early in the morning and playing it until everyone else woke up. Up to that point, I had never figured out how to grind and had gotten stuck with some of the challenges that require you to do that. I finally figured it out and I was so proud of myself. I ended up completing the game, but most of my fun came from just going around doing whatever I wanted. But how does it hold up almost 20 years later? I brought Pickles over to this game as well, and the first thing I noticed was that I can barely see where I'm going. It took me a while just to get acquainted with this game, as well the environments themselves aren't too big, your field of view is extremely small. This makes it a bit challenging to find where the characters are that you need to interact with in order to complete challenges. I finally found them, and in this first area, the challenges are pretty basic. Just skate through some cones, grind some rails, and I like to deliver some papers. Once I completed 3 basic challenges, I was able to partake in the remaining challenges in the area. Each area has 5 basic challenges, 5 intermediate challenges, and 1 boss. I thought I had to beat the boss challenge in order to unlock the next level, but it unlocked once I completed all of the challenges except for the boss. Speaking of levels and challenges, there are only 4 levels in this game, and each one of them has 11 challenges. I was able to complete the neighborhood level in less than 20 minutes, so I assume each of the other levels would take a similar amount of time. This means if you were playing only for the challenges, you'd probably get an hour or 2 of gameplay. The gameplay itself isn't too bad. I actually enjoyed revisiting some of the areas that I hadn't been to in over a decade, but for an adult playing these games, these aren't the greatest. For somebody whose early video game memories consist of playing backyard basketball in the car on the way to school, playing backyard soccer on the plug and play, and spending countless hours cheesing backyard football, this was a nice stroll down memory lane. When critiquing these games today, I think it's important to put myself in the mindset that these games weren't created for adults to be playing 20 years in the future. They were made for kids to have fun with, and with that in mind, I think these games are pretty good. Anyone that was looking for a more serious sports game at the time would have had plenty of options, but for a young kid that just wanted to be able to play hockey or football while in the car, or at a sibling sports practice, these games were perfect. And while I probably won't be playing any of these games again anytime soon, I'm glad they were part of my childhood. If you stuck around this far in the video, let me know if you have any memories playing these games as a kid, and if there are any other games that I should cover in the future. Other than that, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you soon.